Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. Nice to have you with us today. University of Calgary has a study linking a healthy diet to prevention of prostate cancer. That's good news. A lot of men have prostate cancer, especially over the age of 50. We have a lot of health and healing information to share with you today, including compounds in what are called monster radishes that could help tame cardiovascular disease from the American Chemical Society. But also today, I'm going to respond to some of the comments that we need more in-depth analysis of where we're at right now because there's so many moving pieces in people's lives. It's a little overwhelming. What do you do? What do you do if you're highly educated, you've had a career, and now your job's not there? If it is, it's at less money. You're burned out as far as stress, and you don't know what's the next move is going to be. And on top of that, you've lived on the Upper West Side. That's from 57th Street up to 115th Street from Riverside Drive to Central Park. It's the largest concentration of successful people in the world. Well, now it's considered the new ghetto. 2 full pages yesterday as vagrants, addicts, and pervs move in, Upper West Side families move out. Crime and Chaos, How the West Was Lost. And I called some people who live on the Upper West Side and asked them, what's your opinion? They said it's everywhere. I mean, it's just, it is bad to the bone. Okay, what's the outcome? I'm going to deal with that today. Do you remember about 7-8 years ago, I said based upon what's happening with climate change, what's happening with debt, and what's happening with people not changing, that there's going to be an outcome where we're going to have 2 zones in America, green zones, which will be, well, high-quality life, restaurants, boutiques, shops, and apartments, penthouses, and they'll be protected. Everyone else, you're on your own. Now, you're on your own. That is actually happening, but it's happening at a faster pace than what anyone anticipated. So too are environmental disasters. Iraq had the hottest day on the planet and the hottest day in their history just 4 days ago. 126 degrees. That is phenomenally hot. But also, glaciers are melting. Right now, they're the largest shelf into the Atlantic, into the Bering Sea is melted. And that's never happened before in Canada. What does that mean? Well, what do the fires in the Amazon mean? Huge fires. And what do the fires in Siberia mean for methane? What do the fires in California mean? It means we've tipped. Nothing we can do will stop it. That is the new norm. Fires, and then rain, delusions of rain, abundance of rain, I should say, with rain bombs. So what do we do? Is there an exit for any of this? Yes, there is. There's a lot that we can do. Actually, a lot of positive things we can do. But first we have to be honest about the problem. So we're going to look at that. And also right now, another part of society is just challenging anything that represents freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom to do with your mind and your body what you believe is in your own best interest, what you desire. No, says a group of young woke people, you don't have that right. We have the right to tell you how you should feel about yourself, how society should feel about you. And we're radicalizing everything. Okay, who gave you permission? We took it, just like the French Revolution. So to address that, tomorrow I'm going to do a very comprehensive commentary. And I'm going to challenge the entire woke generation because you're not acting awakened to a new and a more benevolent future. You are the new Inquisition. But possibly you only know the word Inquisition, you don't know its history. A tutorial tomorrow through the Reformation, the Inquisition, and the Age of Reason or Enlightenment, and then the Age of Romanticism, into our current age. We're de-evolving, people. And remember I gave you the example what would happen if you lived on Park Avenue on the block where the billionaires building is? What would happen if suddenly they no longer picked up your garbage, where they no longer repaired anything that was broken, windows, doors, locks? How long would it take before your building becomes a ghetto building? Well, it turns out a lot quicker than what people anticipated, because nobody anticipated in that scenario massive amounts of people being moved into that area. So we'll discuss that. Also today, I'm going to play the first of numerous shows this week showing you the pros and cons of the current debate over COVID. Are masks necessary? Some say yes, some say no. Which masks? I happen to believe that the barrier mask, the plastic mask, and a 95 underneath of it create the best protection. But then there's science that says that's not the best way, and the masks are functionally useless. All of this is from peer-reviewed science, not opinion. So I'm going to share a lot of that. And what about the antibody tests? They're all the rage, but most of them don't work, are false, and give false positives. So who says that most of these tests are not credible? How about one of the most important immunologists, who also has a background in epidemiology from Oxford University? She says, we're going to play that clip today. Also today, we're going to play a clip, the truth about the coronavirus antibody test. And again, this is all mainstream medicine. And then Brandon O'Neill, the danger of the chattering class. What's he mean? You'll find out. Now, why would I want Brendan O'Neill on the program? He is an avowed hardline Marxist, an atheist. Well, there are things that he and I would disagree on. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have something to say that we can benefit from also. So we'll hear what he has to say, and we can accept or reject in part or whole. But you shouldn't be censoring people because they hold a different position than yourself. How are you going to learn anything? That's our show. Let's begin with the latest on health. The Canadian Cancer Society estimates that more than 23,000 Canadians will be diagnosed with prostate cancer this year. And among the other risk factors, more and more studies point to diet as a major factor in the development of prostate cancer, as it's for cardiovascular disease and diabetes and obesity. We're using data from the study conducted in Montreal over a 7-year period. A research team from the Parent Institute has shown a link between diet and prostate cancer, and that's important. And this was published in Nutrients. So the 3 main dietary profiles analyzed showed that a unhealthy, salty Western diet, also include alcohol and sugar with beverages, was the worst, and the best is a plant-based diet, and followed by the Mediterranean diet. So those of you who have been on a healthy diet, you're on the right side of this. Now, we've always thought carrots and onions and broccoli are important, and they are. But the newest heart-healthy vegetable could be this very large radish. In a study appearing in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, scientists report that compounds found in the daikon, or what they call monster radish, could help protect coronary blood vessels and potentially prevent heart disease and stroke. The findings could lead to the discovery of similar substances in other vegetables and perhaps lead people to be more conscious about what they're eating. Now, most of you have probably not had daikon in your salad. And the daikon, and there's different types of daikon. This particular daikon was the Sakurajima, Sakurajima, but it's a large daikon. And generally it's white, and you clean it off, and then you can peel it down, peel the outer skin down, and then you can cube it or slice it and put it into a salad. It is it's a little on the crisp side. It doesn't have a lot of taste to it. It has a little feel to the mouth. It's a little radishy, and that's because of the sulfur in it. In any case, you can find them at the farmers markets. They're not expensive. In most stores, you can also find daikon. So if you care about your heart, just try putting some daikon radish in your salads. Simple. From Michigan State University comes a study that says knowing that you're engaged in a placebo still allows it to work. So this is how much of a treatment is mind over matter. And I don't believe that it is the mind over matter. I believe that it's the energy being re-stimulated in a way that we have more control over it than what we thought. Give an example. Talk with any athlete in any competition and ask them what's the difference between focus, mindfulness, being in that zone and not being there, having your mind distracted. Well, all it takes is just a split second for a thought to go through your mind, and then you lose that time-space reflex reality. Hence, you miss the ball. You miss the shot. Ted Williams was arguably the greatest hitter in American history, had the highest average. Very few athletes ever bat 400. That's really terrific. And he had a lot of explanations for it, but one was he never took his eye and hence his focus off the ball. All it takes is one blink, one distraction. Now that's true with a lot of things in life, is don't lose your focus. Keep your focus on whatever you're doing. And we know that when we're driving, after all, let's say you're driving in the rain and you got the radio on and you're coming up to a street that you know you have to turn on, but you're not sure where it's at. Almost reflexively, we turn off the radio. Why? Because it distracts us. It takes our attention off 100% of being aware that we have to turn, it's raining, and we might miss our turn. Even in conversations, how many times have you been looking at someone and you know they're not paying attention? They're there, but they're not there. So at the heart of healing, virtually all healing is releasing or opening up the energy's pathways. Now, there are techniques that can help with that. Acupressure, acupuncture, qigong, tai chi, Reiki, mindful meditation, and also hypnosis. But people can develop that ability for themselves to really be focused. Now, when you're really focused upon reversing a disease, you're liberating a different energy than being fearful of the outcome of a disease where, oh my God, I'm going to die, I'm going to lose this, I'm at the end of something. And suddenly your whole energy is a nocebo. You're actually creating the very thing you fear. So by focusing upon the positive, the energy you feel that is liberating and healing, you can feel it, you know it. You feel the lightness of the energy. And that's what meditation and prayer and mindfulness does. It opens up that door and allows the energy that's in us to come out. And that's important. Now, if you're with someone who is helping you in that process, all the better. But remember, at the end of the day, you are in charge of that, and this placebo proves powerful even when people knew they were taking one. That still shows that placebos are not inert. This was published in the highly respected Journal of Nature Communications. So something they're finally acknowledging. I remember there was a Dr. Lawrence LeShan, and he was one of the more important psychologists. He came out of that Erich Fromm, Rollo May school of thought. And from that school came Kami Harari, Martin Shepard, Elaine Kahn, Alan Putterman, Donald Mullins, a whole lot of people. And by the way, about 5 of those people were my friends, not just professional friends, but personal friends. So I got to see how they thought about behavioralism. And all of them recognized Lawrence LeShan because he was the first to show that a negative thought, especially one of being unloved or unappreciated by people that you expected that love and appreciation from, would contribute to a nocebo effect, meaning you can actually create disease. In this case, it was either arthritis or breast cancer. And he found this in women who had no history whatsoever of breast cancer in their family going back generations. And they had no lifestyle predictors like smoking, etc. And yet this number of women developed breast cancer, and he found the common denominator as they did not feel that they were being accepted for the sacrifices they were making for others, for being responsible to help other people, and there was nothing coming back in return. Now that's a nocebo effect. Now imagine the placebo effect, that you're around people who appreciate you and who give you positive feedback, honest feedback, but at least honest and positive, that you have a choice now about everything. Do you want to go to the left here or to the right? Do you want to keep a positive attitude even in crisis, even in trying times, even with a serious disease? Or do you want to put on that victim energy, because that's a non-constructive energy? One will speed up the death process and create disease. The other helps you if you're sick. Why is none of this taught in medical school? The one thing that all doctors, nurses should know is energy. And the one course that is absolutely forbidden in all schools, energy. In fact, the skeptics call all of that energy healing nonsense healing. No, it's real. It works. So it's important that we realize positive energy, positive thoughts, have a positive outcome. From the University College Dublin, which is in Ireland, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Journal of Medicine, comes an article on sugary drinks and disease. So if you were to consume just 2 average sodas per day, I'm not talking about the giant liters, I'm talking about just 2 average per day, it increases your risk of dying prematurely. Yes. So on top of raising blood sugar and contributing to abdominal fat, the researchers found that soda can also lead to an earlier death. So that's just the truth about sugar and soda. But there's been so much power of the sugar lobby to try to control the media that very few people really are aware of that. And the science is there to substantiate that. I had my first major national radio debate on the Bob Kane Show on NBC with the head of the American Council for Science and Health, Elizabeth Whalen. The topic was sugar. I brought over 3 ounces. 3 ounces of sugar can suspend up to half of your immune system for 6 hours. So what if you had sugar in the morning and you had sugar in the afternoon? That means most of your day, your immune system is put into a straitjacket. Now think of how many people go through a season drinking fresh juices, having healthy water, but not sugary beverages. Those people are more likely not to come down with disease because their immune system is stronger. So just remember that. Sugar can cause premature death. And this was no little study. This was 451,743 individuals living in 10 different countries, including Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. They participated in the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer and Nutrition Study, which is one of the largest ongoing cohort studies on diet in its relation to cancer and other chronic diseases. So that's important. Good study shows sugar's bad. That's the latest on health and healing. We are 19 minutes into our program. We're going to take a break, and when we come back from the break, we're going to go directly to this clip. Now, this is a short clip. It's about the truth about the coronavirus antibody tests. You want to hear this. Please stay with us.
Confusion and even some misinformation out there about antibody tests, so I thought I'd set the record straight. I'll give you the scoop on what happens when you're infected with COVID-19, how your immune system reacts, and what's the deal with all these antibody tests. Should you be running out to get one? I'll answer those questions and more starting now. First things first, let's talk about what happens if you're infected with COVID-19. Well, first, you have to be exposed to someone who has COVID-19. Generally, that person will either cough or sneeze and expel respiratory droplets that then have to make contact with your mucous membranes, your mouth, your nose, your eyes. Sometimes they'll land on your hand and then you'll make contact with your face. Then one of those viral particles will attach itself to one of your cells. It will then make its way inside the cell and actually start making copies of itself using your own cellular machinery, much like a Xerox machine. Those infected particles will start spreading throughout your body, mostly through the upper and lower airways. That's where COVID-19 seems to thrive. That's when your immune system kicks into high gear and starts kicking that virus's butt. However, at the same time, your immune system starts making antibodies. That's a protein substance which actually gives you lasting immunity against the virus. Let's take chickenpox as an example. If you to get the virus that causes chickenpox, your body fights it off, clears it, and then it creates these antibodies which serve as a lasting immunity. Generally speaking, chickenpox is an illness that you get only once in your life because of these antibodies. Now let's move on and talk about the testing for these antibodies. Generally, there are two types of tests: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative tests simply give us a yes or no answer, whether there's a presence of antibodies at all. For example, if you've ever had a strep swab or a nasal flu swab, those are qualitative tests, positive or negative only. Quantitative tests give us a numerical value which establishes how many antibodies are existing in our blood. These are generally higher end tests that we actually have to send out to a lab through a blood sample. Let's summarize what we know now. You get an infection with COVID-19, your immune system kicks its butt, clears it, creates a lasting immunity through a protein substance known as an antibody. We can test for this antibody. So shouldn't we give this test to as many people as possible so we can send them out into the workforce because they're protected? Not so fast. There's actually 3 problems with these antibody tests I'm about to let you know about. Problem number 1 is we simply don't have enough information on what to do with the results of these tests. For example, let's say you go out and get a qualitative test and you get a positive result. All that really tells us is that you've had COVID-19. It doesn't quite tell us about your level of immunity, because perhaps you had a really mild case and your immune system didn't build up enough antibodies to protect you for the next time. So the solution might be, let's get a quantitative test. Well, that's better, and you're gonna get a numerical value telling us how many antibodies are present. However, we then need to rely on reference ranges. Let me explain reference ranges. If you've ever gotten a test to see if you're immune to measles, you get a numerical value back. And then we look at reference ranges to see if it's above this value, then you know the person's immune. If it falls in between these two numbers, their immunity is falling and they likely need another booster shot. And if it's below this value, they're definitely not immune and they should get a booster ASAP. With COVID-19, whatever number we get is great, it might be accurate, but we don't have these reference ranges set up like we do with measles, of which we have decades worth of research. COVID-19 is a novel virus. These reference ranges take years to develop, so it's gonna take some time until we know what's what. And the final point of all this is we don't know how long the immunity lasts. Perhaps you do have antibodies, perhaps you are immune, but how long is that immunity gonna last? Is it gonna be 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or a lifetime? We don't know that information yet, but we will soon. The second problem here is poor quality tests. There's over 100 of these tests on the market, with only 4 of them being FDA approved through an EUA. That's the Emergency Use Authorization. It essentially allows companies with limited evidence, but still decent evidence, to show that the FDA, their products actually work. Think about the dozens that are out there that are really poor quality, manufactured God knows where, and can be giving questionable results. Problem number 3, the false positive rate. Look, no test is perfect. They all have a margin of error. And one of the examples of that is a false positive rate, where it tells you you're positive, but you're actually not. It's flat out wrong. And some of the best tests have a 5% false positive rate. That sounds pretty good, but let's take this example into consideration. Picture yourself in a town of 100 people, and 5 of those people have had COVID-19 and cleared it. And the government wants to use this antibody test to find out who those 5 people are. They're gonna give the test to everybody, and they're gonna find out 5 people have had it. But because it has a 5% false positive rate, 5 other individuals will also test positive, even though they've never had COVID-19. That makes for a total of 10 positive tests, 5 of which are accurate. That means a 50% accuracy. Not so accurate because the prevalence of the disease is quite low. But when the prevalence of the disease goes up, say 50 people have had it in this town, you have 50 people test positive correctly, 5 people test positive incorrectly, and when you do the math, It's at over a 90% accuracy. You see how the prevalence of an illness can affect the accuracy of a test? That false positive rate really needs to be taken into consideration when we use it in areas with a low prevalence of COVID-19. All that goes to show that you as an individual should not run out to get tested for COVID-19 antibodies. We just don't yet know what to do with the information. We can't tell you if you're 100% immune even if you do test positive. The last thing we want you to do is think you have a layer of security when you truly do not. What we can use this information for is on a state, on a government level, to see where COVID-19 is prevalent. How many people have had COVID-19 and not even known it? What's the true fatality rate of this virus? And which areas can we start loosening the social restrictions in to get our economy back? This antibody test is really important, but it's not important to us as individuals.
Okay, now that was a mainstream physician making those statements, and you heard him say several things, but he was inaccurate on one of the statements he made, that there's a 5% false positive. That's not correct. In fact, the test that they're using, the PCR test, the developer of that test, Professor Gary Null, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for developing the PCR, stated that it is a magnification test, meaning it'll get a single particle, and magnify it. It does not show you how many viruses you have, and it's not to be used as a diagnostic for a viral infection, as people were doing with HIV, and he said, don't do it. Now, he told me that himself. I have him on film. You can see the clips of the film footage and different documentaries I did with Gary Null. So the people today are doing what they did during the AIDS problem, meaning we had an HIV virus, and it was causing problems, but then along came a person who made the cover of Time, Dr. Ho, and said, well, we've got to hit them hard and hit them fast, once we know the viral load, to bring down the viral load, meaning the more viruses you have in your body, the more likely you are to succumb to it. The trouble is that a lot of the people who are diagnosed with full-blown AIDS and had multiple opportunistic infections had almost non-measurable titers of HIV in their blood. In fact, the CDC put out a paper one year showing that there were over 5,000 people with what they called idiopathic HIV, meaning they had AIDS, but they had no HIV in their body. Well, then what caused these 5,000 people to end up with AIDS? Then clearly some cofactor was also at work. Now, once that got out, and I and other journalists began to write about it, then they no longer provided that information. And we had seen that a lot. So what happens is that a person is told, go take this test and we'll see if you have the antibody. You go and take the test, and they say, yeah, you have the antibody. But what if the test has a high false positive, like 30, 40%? Then it's a worthless test. That's the current test being used. Now think of all the people who were told you have the antibody or you don't have the antibody, false positive, false negatives, and already about 90% of these tests have been discarded. Well, they're discarding them now. What about the millions of people who took these tests from the beginning that was used as the basis for saying that all these people are infected and are going to get sick and die? Then the entire foundation upon which this pandemic rests is completely scientifically invalid. Is there a real virus? Yes. Can it kill people? Yes. Is it the same in all people? No. In fact, 99.7% of the people who come in contact with the virus will survive. And the vast majority won't even know they've had the virus. Their body's immune system will defend it. Well, since at the heart of everything is the immune system of the body, shouldn't we be promoting what people can do to naturally build up their immune system, like spending time exercising in the sun? Yes. And eating a healthy diet and juicing and staying away from sugar, as I just mentioned, that can destroy your immune system's response. Yes. And taking those supplements published in the peer-reviewed literature in PubMed, like astragalus and vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc, among others, that show that you can fight viruses of all types. Yeah, we're doing none of the above. So that should raise a red flag and say, hold on a second. Why are you taking away all the responsibility except for washing hands, wearing a mask, and distancing. And that's fine. People want to do that. They can do it. There's literature that supports both sides of that. But what I'm concerned with is that we have a simple way of protecting people with comorbidities, especially people who are overweight. We can put them on healthy diets. We can help put them in a de-stressed environment. We can give them the nutrients that help protect their heart and lungs from infection. And that's what we should be doing. Those are the people that should be in quarantine, but in a different type of quarantine, because if those people start to get symptoms, then there's early interventions, and I've mentioned 3 already. I have another one today. But hydroxychloroquine has multiple studies that show that it works. And I'm going to give the latest. There is a systematic campaign to destroy its reputation. Now, had the president not claimed that he had taken it, whether he did or not, I don't know, but then it became political. So they politicized it to go after him. Why? Because they want to show he's mismanaged the coronavirus, and therefore he shouldn't be president, and they win. But don't, dislike the president all you want. Vote against him all you want. Campaign against him. That's your right in a democracy. But don't weaponize and politicize a legitimate concern that people have and play with their lives. Had we done this at the beginning when I was suggesting it, that we would not have put anyone with COVID virus into a nursing home. That meant that 50 to 70% of all the deaths throughout the world wouldn't have occurred. Hence, then you would have had nothing that would have justified needing a vaccine, expensive new medicines. You would have had existing FDA-approved medicines to be used around the world for like 60 cents now is what it costs to make a hydroxychloroquine tablet, 200 milligrams. When they said it was no good, they were using 2,400 milligrams every day instead of 200 milligrams with zinc and with a antibiotic twice a week. Totally different protocol. Now, it's not anyone in the alternative field suggesting this approach. These are mainstream rank and file doctors who are just angry at how politicized everything's become. So adding into why we do not have yet a universal gold standard antibody test, and therefore the antibody tests they're giving us are problematic. But if you test positive, you're in trouble, because then they can go to every single person you've ever come into contact with in the recent past and then start this whole tracing, and now they're making it mandatory. Here is what one of the world's leading principal investigators, a professor, Professor Sunetra Gupta, who is from Oxford University, has a whole program over there on the Oxford Martin School, and her background is in influenza and virology, bacteriology. She studies bacterial meningitis, influenza, malaria. Here's what she had to say in an interview. Listen carefully, please.
A result like that?
I think one has to be aware that a lot of these antibody tests are extremely unreliable.
Okay. Did you hear that quoted in the New York Times, CNN? Was she invited on to share that particular point of view, to defend it? No, she was not. But you just heard it with your own ears. Why is it you're going to hear things here and cited here and nowhere else? They have the resources, but they also have an agenda. It's just like once in a while Charles Ortley sends me, and he, if you don't know him, he was the publisher of the #1 gay publication in America, if not the world, called The New York Native, and he had outstanding writers and investigative journalists working with him. I had him on my radio show many times because he was finding the truth that a lot of people diagnosed with AIDS actually had chronic fatigue syndrome. It had been misdiagnosed. And also human herpes 6 and other conditions that without those you wouldn't have had an AIDS diagnosis. But once you were put on very high levels of the antiretrovirals and was overtreated, and in fact you were treated to death with AZT, that they got it all wrong. So once the gay community and the AIDS community got together with Anthony Fauci, they went after him and ultimately succeeded in shutting down his publication. So the same people, many of the same people who mismanaged the entire war on AIDS are mismanaging the entire COVID, and especially Anthony Fauci. Here's what he said. this morning, Gary and Rich, a number of scientists who suspect that pigs are a vector for COVID-19 are frustrated and mystified by the fact that pigs in China and the United States are not being directly tested for SARS-CoV-2. I think the resistance may come from the fear of where this would lead, namely the following question. Did the Wuhan laboratory do a gain of function research on a coronavirus that involved pigs, and did any of the money, millions of dollars, by the way, from Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease support that research? And thank you, Charles, if you're listening, for sending that. However, what that means is that Anthony Fauci and the federal government knowingly supported the creation of the COVID-19 virus. So that's where the blocking of all truth comes, and the censoring of anyone who even suggests it. But you're hearing it today. Now, can we prove this at this moment? No. But we can prove, A, Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease did give millions of dollars to the Wuhan laboratory to do gain of function research on a coronavirus that involved pigs. That we can prove. But whether or not that then meant that that is the virus that we now are infected by, that is still another step that has to be taken to see whether it's confirmed or not. But again, you have to look at everything that's going on. For example, could we be looking at what is called the health passport of the future for all travel and events, and that you must have your COVID vaccine, and means you must have your antibody test in order to declare yourself safe. But how in the world can they say any vaccine is safe when natural immunity seems in only those that have it, not everyone does? Many people have come down with COVID multiple times in the same year. But they're looking now at about 2 months. That would mean you would have to have a vaccine every several months, or at least every 6 times a year. Well, how many people are going to get 6 vaccines? What are the side effects of those vaccines? They're not talking about that, but they should. Also, there's a very interesting study about the vaccine from Emma Kahn from the International Association of Scientific, Independent, and Benevolent Medicine. I'll quote this, and there are a couple other interesting quotes. She's saying these vaccines are too risky. Quote, strangely enough, the 3 vaccines in clinical trials in the West against COVID-19 are being developed by startups. And she goes on to talk about how industry experts already know that coronavirus vaccines are too risky. They induce facilitation. By the way, that's a new term I'll explain to you. And immunopathological phenomena. The phenomena of facilitation of infection by antibodies is crucial to understand. So the question is, even if they have a vaccine, which they will it have gone through the 10 to 20 years of testing before it's been proven safe and effective? No, they will not go through any of that. So these are facts I'm going to share with you, and they're particularly relevant to the coronavirus family of SARS with vaccines. And this is from March 5th, 2020. Dr. Peter Hotz warned the U.S. Congress about the facilitation of antibody infections and its relationship to vaccine. Quote, we must be very careful and go slowly with clinical trials. Animal trials have shown facilitation. Okay, quote, the biggest problem is the fear of an ADE, meaning an antibody-dependent enhancement, facilitation of infection by the vaccine, mediated by antibodies, induced by vaccination, facilitation of the penetration of the virus into the cells by the receptor for the Fc fragment of immunoglobulins. So Big Pharma is cautious. Is it? So Not only will this vaccine not protect you at all or not enough, but it can make things worse by facilitating your infection with COVID-19. The phenomena facilitating viral infection by antibodies, or what they call ADE, or antibody-dependent enhancement, has been known for a long time and exists for many viruses. Let me make it even simpler. Antibodies of this type have been demonstrated in vitro. In the case of SARS-2 and candidate vaccines would only aggravate this immunopathological effect. This is even more likely if we skip the steps. Now, then a journalist, a leading journalist, Celine, had this to say, quote, coronavirus, the dangers of a hastily developed vaccine. Faced with the urgency, scientists call for speeding up testing procedures and dispensing with the usual animal test. The laudable strategy, but one that could prove to be the best counterproductive and at worst cause deaths, end quote. Quote, normally it takes between 15 to 20 years to obtain an effective, non-toxic and usable vaccine. The first step is to develop a formulation with the chemical and pharmaceutical prerequisites, conduct immunogenicity studies in animals, evaluate the toxicity of the vaccine in animals, then in humans, and finally test its effectiveness on a large scale. None of that's happening. The European Union, in particular, and its new president, are organizing a world telethon to fund research for a vaccine and is trying to impose the idea that only a vaccine can save us. Quote, in the face of urgency and pressure from governments and health authorities, some are calling for the procedure to be speeded up. Okay, well, you speed it up. You're right back to AZT. And this is a final comment from Dr. Peter Hutz, who advised us to be very careful. Quote, a vaccine is not insignificant. It is most often a deactivated or weakened virus, and in some cases it can aggravate the disease it is supposed to prevent. And by the way, he's the dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, and he worked on the SARS outbreak in 2003 and found that some vaccinated animals developed even more severe symptoms when exposed to the virus because of a weakened immune system. This is called antibody-dependent enhancement, end quote. So just remember, we are telling you that they're rushing like crazy to get this out, and all the green lights are on, so they're going straight ahead. And also, Duke University research and a Singapore pharmaceutical company have provided the povidone, P-O-V-I-D-O-N-E, iodine, demonstrates rapid in vitro virucidal activity against SARS-2, the virus causing COVID-19 disease. And so anyhow, I looked at the results and the conclusion, and it was not that impressive from my perspective. But for those who want to look at everything that is at all positive, it's certainly one more positive step. So here's something from Der Spiegel, one of the most respected publications in the world. Quote, by Wu Danden and Christina Heba and Lauren Hofflinger. Russia, China, and India are racing to find a coronavirus vaccine, but the international standards are not always being respected. Some researchers have even tested their remedies on themselves. And then it goes on to talk about how Alexander Ginsburg injected himself with the vaccine he developed. He hadn't even begun testing the substance on monkeys. That was 4 months ago. And Ginsburg, a microbiologist and director of the state-owned Gamaleya Institute in Moscow, says he's still feeling just fine. 100 Institute employees also agreed to be vaccinated, and all are still healthy. Ginsburg is working on what is called a vector vaccine, which involves introducing genetic material from the SARS-2 virus into a harmless carrier virus in order to trigger the human immune system to produce antibodies. And the 68-year-old Ginsburg isn't particularly interested in the risks associated with injecting a substance that is still in development. Quote, I want to protect myself and my employees, he says, claiming that his vaccine is both safe and effective. After all, he says, he's already developed a vaccine on one other occasion. I think that is extremely careless, because we have seen from hundreds of thousands of people who've been adversely affected by vaccines that sometimes it takes 6 months, a year, 2 years, or 4 years with the case of autism before you can finally say, there's a neurological connection between the vaccine, the MMR vaccine, or Gardasil, whatever it is, and autism spectrum disorder. So you can't just say that everything's okay because you took a vaccine and a month later you're still okay. That doesn't work. Oh, by the way, 39% of younger millennials return home amid crushing recession. 39%. That's huge. It's also a huge burden, because don't assume that all 39% of younger millennials returning home, we're talking about millions and millions of people returning home, are returning home to families that have lots of savings, have, quality time to spend with each other. The average American is stressed to the max, broke beyond the max, and it doesn't look like there's any forgiveness coming their way. So that is not good. And this is from Ian Welch. And here's what he has to say. America is about to feel like a third world nation. Quote, I spent a good chunk of my childhood in third world countries. Most of it was in Bangladesh, then arguably the poorest country in the world. But I visited or lived in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Nepal, and India, among others. There's a feel in the third world one becomes familiar with. Beggars, infrastructures that don't work, people doing terrible menial jobs. There's the huge disparity between the wealthy and everyone else, or even those who have managed to attach themselves in a similar dignified way to the wealthy. Cruelty is routine and unremarkable. India police officers routinely beat people as punishment, similar to Americans. Servants are treated terribly, and in fact, the locals routinely treated the servants far worse than foreigners. This has hardly changed. In 19th century, a noted person from America treated their servants far better than Indians did, meaning the state of India. Americans about to make a double-digit percentage of its population homeless. Listen carefully to this. This is very, very important to what we're going to be hitting almost immediately, and at warp speed. This is going to ghettoize all of America. Quote, something like 20 to 30% or more of American small businesses have or will shut down by the end of the pandemic. The jobs won't all come back, and those that do will pay worse and feature worse treatment than the ones before, which were mostly not well paid and featured routine meanness. We're talking about 30 million to 60 million homeless. These are staggering numbers. The United States will feel third world. Oh, parts already did. When I landed in Miami airport the first time, I immediately thought third world, relatively prosperous third world, but third world. Those places will be worse, and Florida, as I predicted near the beginning of the crisis, will be very bad. Of course, for many, little will change. They'll keep their jobs. They'll be fine. I recently witnessed a discussion of InfoSec jobs, talking about how for a person with a degree and a couple certifications, 120,000 was a lowball. There will still be good jobs, and you'll still be able to lose everything in a few months if you become seriously ill. But when those people are banging on out in the streets, they'll see even more than now the fate that awaits them if they slip. So much of American meanness, and the culture is mean, in the details of its daily life comes from this fear, because it is so easy to slip into the underclass, even if one does everything right. Americans are scared, even terrified all the time. They suppress it with massive amounts of drugs, most of them legal, and most deny it. But the fear drives cruelty. In the Great Depression, people became less cruel, not more. They say that the idea of meritocracy was absolute nonsense. The richest people in society had screwed up. Good people wound up in poverty, and merit had nothing to do with who had how much. I hope this is what will happen again in America this time. I fear instead it will lead to even more cruelty. Instead of saying we should make sure everyone is taken care of and instituting universal health care and good wages and non-punitive welfare system, Americans will instead become even more cruel out of fear of losing their place. America is undeveloping. It is moving from being a developed nation to being an undeveloped nation. This process has been going on for a long time, at least 40 years, arguably since about 68 or so. The frustration as an analyst was that the trend was obvious, but it took so long. There is, the Keynes say, a lot of ruin in a nation. Change is slow, very slow, until it is fast. People who live in the slow period of long decline don't really believe in collapse. They assume that things will get worse in a steady line. But in fact, there are long periods where everything changes slowly, then periods like earthquakes. 2008 was an earthquake and a collapse nearly inevitable by bailing out the rich. This is an earthquake. America will feel different afterwards, even if COVID does go away 100%, which is, it may not. And he goes on from there. So I believe that he is correct, and here's one more reason. Quote, without more federal aid for workers, experts are expecting the largest disruption to the housing market since the Depression. Millions of evictions are a sharper threat as government support ends. But that's not the worst of it. But when government support ends, inevitably it will, what if there's no infrastructure? What if there's no business for a person to go out and get a job, and a meaningful job, and a good paying job? Because on top of everything else, I've been doing programs for the last 10 years on automation, on work visas, on transhumanism and artificial intelligence, all of which are stripping millions of jobs out of the workplace. On top of that, the equity partners who buy companies, they want the brand and send the manufacturing off to another country like India or China, and all those people no longer have a job, nor any benefits. So what you see is you have a perfect storm happening. You have COVID being politicized and weaponized when we could have a nation of people get back to work. Children are, again, they're being tested, but the antibody tests are inaccurate, and the death certificates are being forged. We have no idea how many people have actually died because of COVID. We only know that people with comorbidities were the largest single group, and they were being overtreated and not treated accordingly. And tomorrow I'll do a whole discussion of the newest research on the power of the science. And it's not just a few tests. We've come up with over 100,000 people who've been in tests who've gotten the hydroxychloroquine, and it works. So why would they be so interested in saying it doesn't work? Well, there's a profit to it. And there's no profit to anyone to give them a dollar pill. No, that's not how we work. By the way, I want to thank Scott Russell. Scott, thank you. You sent this over today, and it was a scientific peer-reviewed study published in the American Journal of Case Reports, and it showed of a person an older person who had COVID, advanced, and everything they tried did not work. And then they tried intravenous vitamin C, and, quote, she was initiated on oral hydroxy intravenous, azithromycin, zinc sulfate, and oral vitamin C after developing acute respiratory distress syndrome and septic shock on day 6 of her stay. She was mechanically ventilated and pressor support, and then she was given higher intravenous vitamin C. The patient clinically improved and within 5 days was taken off mechanical ventilation. So there are more and more people using vitamin C preventatively, but this is a case where a patient reversed because of vitamin C, and they had given her hydroxychloroquine too late. The key is you got to give it early and at low dose in combination therapy, but that's just another study that you won't hear anyone talking about, but we should. Tomorrow I'm going to give some solutions. What can we do? All right, what can we do to help ourselves with global warming and the consequences that are occurring now? COVID virus, and with the collapse of our economy, the corruption of our body politic, and the bias within the media, so we don't know who to believe. So I will set time aside tomorrow for an in-depth commentary on there are things that we can do to improve our life, to save our life, and to help the planet. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.